They ran me through the gate on a gray morning, and the machine that reads a soldier looked at me for a long time and found nothing to read. I had been 9 years gone. That is the first thing to understand, and it is the thing they could not. 9 years in a place their instruments never reached, doing work that was never logged, for a war that ended without anyone bothering to write down who had won it or what it had cost. When the transport finally set me back down inside the Concord's borders, I had one bag, a body that ached in the old cold weather, and a service tag that said in their careful script that my record began the moment I stepped through the gate. Everything before that was blank, not classified, not sealed, blank. The scanner passed its light over me and the light came back empty, and to the Cethran an empty man is a man who has never done anything at all. The Hesper Lyceum did not look like a place a soldier ends up. It looked like a place a soldier is invented. It sat on the shoulder of a white hill above a white city, all of it clean lines and cold glass, towers that caught the morning and threw it back at you so the whole campus seemed lit from inside. Broad avenues, glowing pillars, courtyards where young Cethran moved in their pale uniforms like water finding a channel. Everything gleamed. Everything was legible. That was the word for the place, if you had to give it one. Legible. There was nothing there you could not read at a glance if you knew the language, and the Cethran read one another the way I might read a road sign. I did not know the language yet. I learned it fast because you learn what is used against you. A Cethran wears their life on their back. Down the spine and across the shoulders they carry rows of scales, record scales. The manuals call them, though the Cethran do not call them anything, any more than you would name your own face. The scales hold light. Every action a Cethran soldier completes, every drill passed, every engagement survived, every commendation earned, is logged to the central ledger, and the ledger writes back to the body, and the scales glow according to what the soldier has done. A green so deep it is nearly black on the ones who have seen real war, a thin, nervous gold on the young. The recruits at the Lyceum had scales like the first light of a candle, barely lit, flickering when they were nervous. A master might walk into a room and every scale on his back would be burning steady, and every young soldier in that room would feel it the way you feel the sun come out. I had no scales. I had a back like a wall. When they scanned me at the gate, the reader found no ledger entry, no logged history, no light at all, and it filed me the only way the doctrine allowed, unrecorded, reset to zero, a blank. They gave me a bunk in the intake dormitory, among cadets a third my age. The assessor who processed me was called Corvin Seld, and he was, I would come to understand, the most important thing in that building for the purpose of my story, which is why I will tell you what he was before I tell you what he did. Seld was old for a Cethran, and his scales were burnt down almost to black, a green so dark it drank the light instead of giving it back, which meant he had done everything a soldier could do and then done it for 40 years more. He ran the intake course. That was beneath a man of his record, and everyone knew it and no one said it because Seld had asked for the posting. He had asked for it, the junior instructors whispered, because he believed the war college had gone soft, that it let the wrong soldiers through, and he had decided to stand at the narrow gate himself and make sure only the correct ones passed. He was not cruel. I want to be fair to him, even now. He was worse than cruel. He was certain. He stood over my file, a physical thing, printed, because a blank cannot be trusted to the ledger, and he read the one line it contained, and he looked at me with eyes the color of wet slate, set wide on a long gray face, and he said, in Concord standard so I would understand him, "You have no record." "No," I said. "You understand what that means here." "You'll tell me," I said. The scales on his back moved. Not much. A slow ripple, the Cethran equivalent of a man narrowing his eyes. "It means," he said, "that whatever you were before this gate, you are not it now. The ledger does not know you, therefore you do not know anything. You will begin where the youngest of them begins, and you will earn every mark from zero, and if you cannot earn them, you will leave. There is no allowance for age. There is no allowance for a story I cannot read." He set the file down. "Do you have a story I cannot read, blank?" I thought about the 9 years. I thought about the cold and the ridgeline where we had held for 200 days, and the men whose names were also written nowhere. I thought about how I would explain any of it to a creature who believed that a thing not written down had not happened. No, I said, no story. That was the truest thing I told him, and he took it for a lie, and we understood each other perfectly from that moment on. The intake course ran 90 days. In the first week, I learned the shape of it. They woke us before light and ran us in the cold, up the white hill and down, and the young Seathrin ran the way young soldiers everywhere run, all effort and no economy, spending themselves on the first mile so they had nothing left for the last. I ran at the back, at the pace I had run for 9 years, which is the pace of a man who has learned that the point is not to be fast but to still be moving when everyone else has stopped. On the third morning, a boy went down on the hill, a slight cadet named Otrin who had been near the front, and he lay there with his gold scales flickering wild and panicked, and the pack ran on past him because the doctrine said a soldier who falls is a soldier who has failed, and you do not stop for failure. I stopped. I got him up. I did not carry him, a man who is carried learns nothing, but I got him on his feet and set his arm over my shoulder and walked him down the last half-mile at my slow pace, talking to him the whole way about nothing, about the cold, about his breathing, the way you do. His scales settled as we walked. By the bottom of the hill they had stopped flickering. He never thanked me. He was ashamed, and shame in a Seathrin turns outward, and I would pay for that kindness later. But I did not know it yet, and it would not have changed what I did. Assessor Seld was standing at the foot of the hill with his black scales burning, and he had watched the whole thing. And when I brought the boy in, he made a note in the printed file that only I could not read. The young ones called me the blank when they thought I couldn't hear, and to my face they called me nothing at all, because there was no rank to call me and no record to name me. I did not mind it. I had been called worse by better. I kept my head down and did the work, and the work in those first weeks was easy in the way that is hardest to bear. It was easy and it was pointless, marching and drilling and reciting doctrine, the busy work of an institution that has forgotten why it does most of what it does. I could have done it in my sleep. I nearly did. And that was the trap, though I didn't see the trap either, not at first. Because a man who finds the work easy stops watching himself, and a man who stops watching himself makes a mistake. And Seld was waiting for my mistake the way a patient hunter waits at a water hole. He said it for me in the third week, in the sparring hall. Seathrin combat training is a formal thing, ritualized, scored. Two cadets face off on a marked circle, and the ledger watches through the hall's instruments and logs every strike, every point, every fault, and writes it to their scales in real time so that you can watch a young soldier's back brighten as he wins or dim as he loses. It is, I will admit, a beautiful thing to see and a terrible thing, because it means every Seathrin fights with one eye on the light on his own shoulders. They do not fight the enemy in front of them, they fight the ledger. Seld matched me against Otrin. He did it, I understood later, as a lesson in two directions. The boy had been shamed on the hill and needed to reclaim his mark. The blank needed to be shown, in front of the whole intake, exactly how much his 40 years of nothing were worth against a properly logged Seathrin cadet less than a quarter his age. Otrin was fast. The young are always fast. He had been near the front of the run because he had real ability, and now that ability had a grievance attached to it, and he came across the circle at me the moment the tone sounded, low and quick, his scales flaring bright with the crowd's attention. I want to tell you plainly what happened, because it matters that you understand it was not a marvel. It was not speed. I was not faster than that boy. I have not been faster than a 20-year-old anything in a long time. It was that I had done this 10,000 times against people who were trying to kill me for real, on ground that was trying to kill me too, and my body had long ago stopped asking my mind for permission. Otrin came in fast and I was not where he expected me to be, because he had aimed at where a man my age should be, and I put my hand where his weight was going and let his own speed take him past me and down. He hit the mat. The tone sounded. The ledger, confused, logged nothing, because nothing it recognized as a technique had occurred. He came up furious and came again, and I put him down again, softer this time, a hand on the shoulder and a turn of the hip, the way you'd steer a man out of a doorway. And a third time. I never struck him. I want that understood. In 3 exchanges I never threw a single blow because a blow would have been a conversation with the ledger, and I was not talking to the ledger. I was just declining to be hit, over and over, until the boy had spent himself against a wall that would not spin back, and then I stepped away and let the tone run out and the match end at 0-0. No points scored, no marks written, an official nothing. The hall was silent. In a room full of soldiers who measured worth in written light, I had just done something the light could not see, and they did not have a word for it. Atren stood in the middle of the circle with his bright gold scales and his heaving sides and no idea what had been done to him, and he hated me, and I did not blame him. Seld dismissed the hall, but he stopped me at the door with one gray hand. "That was not fighting," he said. "No," I agreed. The ledger recorded no engagement. "No." His slate eyes moved over me, and for the first time I saw something in them that was not certainty. "What did you do?" he said. It was not quite a question. "I got out of the way," I said. For as long as he wanted to run into things, that's most of the job, assessor, getting out of the way and still being there at the end. The scales on his back went very still. Then he said, "The ledger does not record getting out of the way," and he turned and left me standing in the doorway, and I understood that I had frightened him, and that a frightened certain man is the most dangerous thing there is. He came for me properly in the field. Halfway through the course they take the intake out of the white towers and put them on the moor. It is old country, north of the city, gray heather and gray rock, and a wind that never fully stops, and the Seathrin keep it deliberately wild as a proving ground. The exercise was simple in its statement and brutal in its execution. 7 days on the moor in squads of 5, resupplied nothing, tasked with reaching a series of marked points across 40 miles of broken ground, logged at each waypoint by a beacon that wrote your arrival to the ledger. Reach all the points, you passed. Miss one, you failed. The doctrine held that the moor filtered the weak, that a soldier who could not make his own way across cold, empty ground was a soldier who would break in a war, and better to break him here where it was only shame and not death. Seld put me in a squad of 4 young cadets and made me the 5th, and then he did a thing that told me exactly what he intended. He named me squad blank, not squad leader. There was no rank for me to lead with, but he entered into the printed file that the squad's mark would be tied to mine. If I failed, they failed. He was betting the futures of 4 young soldiers on the blank breaking, so that when I broke, I would take them with me, and every cadet in that intake would learn to hate the unrecorded man the way you hate a flood or a fire, as a thing that ruins the people near it. Atren was one of the 4, of course he was. The other 3 were a solid, silent cadet called Vask, who watched everything and said little, a nervous, clever one named Ilan, whose scales flickered when she thought too hard, and a big soft-hearted boy called Doral, who was strong as a draft animal and about as suited to independent thought. 4 young Seathrin and 1 old human dropped on the moor at first light with the wind coming sideways, and 40 miles of gray between us and the last beacon. They did what young soldiers do. They wanted to move. Movement feels like progress, and progress writes to the ledger, and every one of them was itching to reach the first waypoint and feel their scales brighten with a logged arrival. Atren took charge. No one gave it to him. He simply took it, because I was a blank and blanks do not lead, and he set us off north at a pace that would have been fine for an hour and was suicide for a week. I let him run it for the first mile. Then I sat down on a rock. They stopped. They came back. Atren stood over me with the wind whipping his uniform and demanded to know what I was doing, and I told him the truth, which is the only thing worth telling young soldiers because they can smell a lie and it costs you everything. "We've got 7 days and 40 miles, I said. "That's under 6 miles a day. A man can walk 6 miles before breakfast. The distance isn't the problem. The problem is the cold at night and the water and your feet and staying a squad instead of 5 separate people who happen to be walking the same direction. Run it like this and you'll make 30 miles in 2 days and spend the last 5 on the ground with wet boots and nothing in you. So sit down. We're going to do this slow, and we're going to do this together, and we're going to finish." Atrin did not sit down, but Vask did. The silent one, the watcher. He looked at me a long moment with his flat dark eyes, and then he simply sat, and the others sat because he did, and Atrin stood alone in the wind for as long as his pride could hold him up, and then he sat too. I would like to tell you the 7 days were dramatic. They were not. That is the whole point, and it is the thing the Cethran could not understand about war, or about anything, that the hard part is almost never dramatic. The hard part is boring and cold and it goes on, and the only thing that gets you through it is 100 small correct decisions made when you are too tired to want to make them. I taught those 4 cadets to make small correct decisions. I taught them to dig a scrape out of the wind before dark instead of after, when your hands still work. I taught them to melt water over a shielded flame and drink more than they wanted to, because the cold lies to you about thirst. I taught them to check each other's feet at night and not to be proud about blisters, because a proud man's rotten foot kills a squad slower than a bullet. I taught them to walk in a rhythm, and to eat a little often instead of a lot rarely, and to sleep in a pile like animals for the warmth of it, dignity be damned, because the dead have all the dignity you could want and it does them no good. None of it wrote to the ledger, not one bit of it. There is no logged mark for a well-dug scrape or a squad that still trusts each other on the 6th cold morning. The beacons wrote our arrivals and nothing else, and our scales theirs. I had none stayed the pale gold they'd started with, because the ledger had no way to see that 4 soft young soldiers were being turned, mile by gray mile, into something that would last. On the 4th night the storm came in. Real weather, the kind the moor was famous for, a wall of sleet and wind that dropped the temperature past anything the cadets had trained in. Ilan's flame went out and would not light. Doral, the big soft boy, started to shake in a way I did not like, the deep shaking that is the last warning before a body starts shutting doors. The young one's scales were flickering wild, Paniclite and Atren, to his credit, and I will always give him this, came to me. He came to the blank in the dark in the storm, and he said, "What do we do?" And there was no grievance in it any more, only a young soldier who had run out of answers asking an old one who might have some. We built a snow wall to break the wind, all 5 of us, hands going numb, packing the wet snow into a curved rampart in the lee of a boulder. We got the flame going in the shelter of it. We stripped the big boy of his wet outer layers and put him in the middle of the pile, and the 4 of us wrapped him in our warmth like the walls of a fire. And I talked, the whole night, the way I had talked on the hill, about nothing, about everything, keeping their minds tethered to my voice so they would not drift off into the cold that whispers to you that it's fine to stop. I told them stories. Not true ones exactly. I told them the moor was nothing, that I'd wintered in worse. That men had held ground colder than this for longer than this and walked home to old age, and it was true enough, and it held them. By dawn the storm had blown out and Doral was shaking with cold instead of shutting down, which is the difference between a hard night and a dead boy, and all 5 of us were alive, and the pale scales on 4 Cethran backs had not brightened by a single mark, because the ledger does not record the night you did not die. We reached the last beacon on the 6th day, a full day early, walking, not staggering, walking in rhythm, a squad. When the beacon logged our arrival, the 4 cadets' scales finally brightened with the mark of a completed exercise, and they were glad of it, and I let them be glad of it, and I said nothing about the fact that the mark meant nothing, that the thing they had actually earned would never be written anywhere at all. Some lessons you let a man come to on his own. Assessor Seld was waiting at the beacon. He had come out to the moor to see the blank drag 4 young soldiers to failure, and instead he watched 5 people walk in a day early, unbroken, in good order, and his black scales were so still they might have been carved. He looked at me for a long time. He looked at the 4 cadets, at their steadiness, at the way they arranged themselves around me without being told. A squad that had a center of gravity now, and the center of gravity was the man his doctrine said did not exist. "You reached every point," he said. "We did." A day early. A pause. The ledger records the arrivals. It records nothing else about how you crossed the moor. "No," I said, "it wouldn't." And I watched the certainty in him fight the thing his own eyes had shown him, and I watched the certainty win because it always did, because a man does not unbelieve the thing that has organized his whole life at 50 years and 40 marks of service. He straightened. His scales settled. "Arrivals are logged," he said. "The rest is anecdote. You will report to the assessment hall in 3 days for the final trial blank. We will see what you are when the ledger is watching properly." And he turned and left us on the moor, and Atren watched him go, and then Atren looked at me, and for the first time the boy's face held something other than shame or grievance. It held a question. He was beginning, I think, to wonder whether the light on his own back told him the truth about anything. I did not answer the question. It was not mine to answer. But I put my hand on his shoulder, the way you do, and we walked the last mile back to the towers together, and that was answer enough for that day. The final trial of the intake course was called The Reckoning, and it was the pride of the Hesper Lyceum. And it was, I understood the moment Seld explained it, designed to break me specifically. Understand the shape of it. The reckoning was run in the great assessment hall, a vast round chamber under a dome of white light, ringed with tiers where the whole college gathered to watch, because the reckoning was public. It was the point at which a soldier's worth was written large for all to read. In the center of the floor, the Lyceum's instruments generated a trial space, a shifting, layered problem, part combat, part endurance, part navigation, part decision, run against constructs the ledger controlled and scored in real time. A cadet entered the trial space alone, and the whole hall watched their scales, watched the light rise and fall on their back as they gained marks and lost them. And at the end the ledger rendered a verdict, a final total, written to the body in a burst of light that told everyone forever exactly what that soldier was worth. It was built to be read. Every part of it fed the ledger, and the ledger fed the scales, and the scales told the crowd the story as it happened, and the crowd's roar rose and fell with the light. It was the most legible thing in the most legible place in the Concord, and I had no scales. Whatever I did in that trial space, the crowd would see nothing on my back, no rising light, no falling, no story. In the one arena where worth was made visible, I would be invisible. Seld had chosen my final test to be the test I could not be seen to pass. He told me this himself the night before in the empty hall. He was not gloating. I want to be fair to him to the end. He genuinely believed he was doing something necessary. "You have unsettled my intake," he said, standing under the dark dome. "You have taught 4 cadets to trust a thing the ledger cannot verify. That is a poison. A soldier who trusts what cannot be logged is a soldier who will one day disregard his orders on the strength of a feeling and get his squad killed for it. The ledger is not bureaucracy, blank. The ledger is memory. It is the thing that lets us stand on 40 years of 40 soldiers' work instead of relearning war from nothing every generation. You are asking my cadets to throw that away for the word of a man with no past he'll name. Tomorrow the trial will render its verdict on you, and it will be a low one because you will do things the ledger cannot see, and the cadets will watch your back stay dark, and they will learn that the feeling you gave them is worth nothing when it is measured. That is the lesson. I am sorry it must be you who teaches it, but it must be taught." I listened to all of it. It was a good speech. It was even mostly right, which is what made it dangerous. And when he was done, I said the only thing I had to say, which was not an argument, because You do not argue a man out of the thing that holds his life together. You've got it backwards, Assessor, I said. The ledger isn't the memory, it's the notes. The memory's in the men. The ledger's just where you write down what the men already knew after, so you don't have to keep it all in your head. I looked up at the dark dome where tomorrow the whole college would gather to watch a light that wouldn't come. Tomorrow your ledger's going to watch me and see nothing. That's fine. It was always going to see nothing. It saw nothing for 9 years. The men were still there. He had no answer for that, and he left me in the hall, and I slept, and in the morning they ran the reckoning. The tiers were full. Every soldier in the Lyceum, it seemed, and the masters in their high seats with their burnt black scales, and Seld among them. And down on the floor with the intake I could see 4 faces I knew, Vask, Ilin, Doral, and Atren, watching, their gold scales dim with worry, because they had crossed the moor with me and they knew, whatever the light said, that the blank was not nothing, and they were about to watch the whole college be told that he was. I stepped into the trial space, and it closed around me, and the crowd's roar faded to a hum, and I was alone with the problem the ledger had built to break me. I will not pretend I remember every part of it clearly. It came at me the way real trouble comes, all at once and from directions you didn't check. The trial space threw constructs at me, armored things, fast, and here the crowd expected the light to start on my back, the combat marks, and there was no light. And I heard the hum of the tiers change, confusion, a wrongness, the blank fighting and no story being told. I did not fight the constructs the way the trial wanted me to fight them, in the scored exchanges that fed the ledger. I did what I had done to Atren in the circle and what I had done for 9 years on the ridge. I declined to be where the blow was going. I used the space. I let the fast things spend their speed against the terrain of the trial, and I put them into each other and into the walls, and I was economical, and I was patient, and I was, above all, boring, and the ledger could not score boring, and so my back stayed dark while I dismantled the thing it had built. The trial shifted. It became endurance, a long crossing under load, the trial space stretching itself into cold and distance the way the moor had, and here the crowd expected the endurance marks to light. And again there was nothing, my back a wall, and I put my head down and walked it at the pace of a man who has learned that the point is not to be fast but to still be moving at the end. And I was still moving at the end, dark-backed and silent. A man crossing an invisible distance to no applause, because there was no light to applaud. And then it became the last thing, the thing the reckoning always ended with, the decision. The trial space showed me a construct, a cadet, a young soldier, one of the trial's phantoms, fallen and failing on the ground with its light flickering out, and it showed me the last beacon, the finish, the mark I needed to reach to end the trial and be scored. And the choice was the oldest one there is, the one the ledger asks every soldier in the end. Reach the beacon and log your victory. Or stop for the falling man and log nothing, lose the mark, fail the trial, save the thing that cannot be scored. The doctrine said reach the beacon. The doctrine had always said reach the beacon. That was the point of the reckoning, the final lesson the Lyceum wrote onto every soldier's back, that the mark is the thing, that the light is the thing, that a soldier who stops for failure has failed. Every cadet in that hall knew what the trial wanted. Reach the beacon. Log the win. Let the falling phantom fall. I stopped for the falling man. Of course I did. I had stopped on the hill for Atren on the 3rd morning when the doctrine said run past. I had stopped in the storm on the moor for Doral when the cold said let him go. I stopped in the trial space for a phantom that could give me no mark, and I got it up the way I had got the boy up, and I did not reach the beacon, and the ledger rendered its verdict on me, and the verdict was the lowest it had ever written, a total so near to 0 that the light which finally came to my invisible back would have been no light at all. Except the hall was not silent the way Seld had promised. I came out of the trial space expecting the low murmur of a college watching a blank confirmed as nothing, and instead the great round chamber was dead quiet, the quiet of thousands of soldiers who have just watched something the ledger cannot explain and cannot deny. Because they had watched me. Not my back, there was nothing on my back. They had watched me cross a trial that broke logged cadets, without a single mark, and then throw away the only mark I could have won to stop for a falling man who would never thank me and never remember. And every soldier in that room, whatever their doctrine, knew what they had seen, because the thing I had done was the thing every one of them, in the small honest hours, hoped they would do too. They had watched a man be worth something in the one way the ledger would never record, and they had watched him choose it on purpose, with the whole college watching, knowing it would cost him everything the light could give. Down on the floor, one of the intake cadets began to do a thing that was not done. Atran, the boy I had put in the dirt 3 times, the boy whose future Seld had chained to mine on the moor, Atran stood up from his row, and he reached back over his own shoulder, and he pressed his hand flat against his own record scales, against the bright gold marks he had earned, and he held it there. It is an old Cethran gesture, older than the ledger, and it means, I set aside what is written and stand on what I know. It is the gesture of a soldier who has decided that the light on his back is not the truth about the man in front of him. And then Vask did it, and Ilan, and Doral. And then it moved through the intake and up into the tiers, hand after hand pressed flat against written light and held there. A whole college of soldiers setting aside the ledger to say, without a word, that they had seen what the ledger could not. I stood on the trial floor with my dark, empty back, and I watched a room full of light choose to cover it up, and I understood that Seld had been exactly wrong about what would be taught that day, and exactly right that it would be me who taught it. He came down from the high seats. The whole hall watched the old assessor with his burnt black scales cross the floor to the blank, and I did not know what he would do, and I do not think he did either. He stopped in front of me. His slate eyes moved over my face the way they had that first morning, reading a thing that would not be read. The ledger scored you at nothing, he said quietly, so only I could hear. I know. You crossed a trial that has broken soldiers with 40 marks, and then you failed it on purpose. I reached the end of it, I said. The beacon was just where they put the line. The end of it was the man on the ground. His scales moved, the slow ripple, and this time I could read it because I had learned the language. It was not anger. It was something an old certain man almost never lets himself feel. It was doubt, and under the doubt, older than the doubt, was the thing the doctrine had spent 40 years writing over. It was recognition. He had crossed his own moors once in his own 9 years that no one had watched. He had stopped for his own falling men. And somewhere under all that burnt black written light was a soldier who knew, and had made himself forget, that the mark was never the thing. What are you, he said, not a demand this time, a question at last. A man who came home, I said. That's all. There's no story you can't read, assessor. There's just a story you don't write down, we keep it in the men. He was silent a long time. The hall waited. Then Corvin Seld did the thing I will remember him for, the thing that told me he had been a real soldier once and never entirely stopped. He reached back over his own shoulder, over 40 years of black-green marks, the most logged back in that whole gleaming college, and he pressed his old gray hand flat against his own record scales, and he held it there, in front of every soldier in the Hesper Lyceum, and he covered his own light for the blank who had none. No, he said, no story I can read. And it was not surrender, and it was not defeat. It was the closest a man like that comes to saying he had been wrong, and it cost him more than the trial had cost me, and I respected him for it more than I have respected almost any man. They wanted to enter me after. That was the thing they could not let go of even then, even after. The masters convened and the doctrine strained itself and they found a way. They would open a record for me, backdate a provisional ledger, write the trial and the moor and the sparring circle into permanent light, give the blank a back that finally glowed. They meant it as the highest honor the Lyceum could give. They wanted to make me legible. They wanted to make me one of them, a soldier the light could tell a story about, so that the thing I had done would fit inside the system it had cracked. I said no. I said it gently because they meant well, and because Seld was in the room and I would not shame him a second time. But I said no, and I will tell you why, because it is the whole of what I learned in those 90 days and the whole of what I brought home. If they wrote me into the ledger, then the lesson would be that I had been worth something all along and they simply hadn't had the paperwork, that the light had been right to demand a record, and I had merely, at last, provided one. And that was a lie. The truth was harder and I would not let them soften it. The truth was that I had been worth exactly the same on the day I walked through the gate with nothing on my back as I was on the day the whole college covered their light for me. 9 blank years had made me what I was. The ledger had had no part in it, and I would not let them pretend afterward that it had. Some things you keep out of the notes on purpose, so that the men will remember they were ever in the world at all. So I left the Hesper Lyceum the way I came, with one bag in a back like a wall and no light on it. And I walked down the white hill in the gray morning while behind me a whole gleaming college of soldiers watched a blank go, and did not know how to feel about it, and would not know for a long time, and would be better for the not knowing. Atren walked me to the gate. He had grown in 90 days. His scales had brightened with real marks now, more marks and trial marks, an honest early glow, and he wore them well, but he had learned to hold his hand over them when it mattered, which is a thing they do not teach at the Lyceum and never will. At the gate he stopped, and he did not have the words, the young never do, and I did not need him to have them. "They'll ask me what you were," he said finally. "In the years, when they read my record and see the Moor and the blank who led it, they'll ask, what do I tell them?" I thought about it. The gate was open and the road went down to the White City and past it, and somewhere past all of it was home. The long way home I had been walking for 9 years and was finally, nearly, at the end of. "Tell them a man came back," I said, "from somewhere they don't have a light for, and he was worth something and none of it was written down, and that's how you knew it was real." I put my hand on his shoulder one last time the way you do. "The rest you keep in the men, Atren. That's the only ledger that ever mattered. Don't let them tell you different." Then I picked up my bag and I walked down the hill, and I did not look back, because a man who has finished a thing does not need to watch it end. The wind came off the moor at my back, cold and clean, and the road went down and down toward the city and past it, homeward. And my scales stayed dark the whole way, and there was not one soul left in the world who could read me, and I had never in my life been so exactly, so entirely known.